You know that deeply humbling sensation when you've been pouring your heart into learning something new.
Oh, yeah. The absolute worst.
Right. Like you're putting in the quiet hours, you're drilling the flashcards, reading the
And
manuals.
you feel like you finally have a solid grip on it.
Exactly. But then the moment arrives to actually use that skill
Yeah.
in the real world.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a high stakes meeting or you're traveling or you're presenting a new project and you just freeze.
Completely
The
free.
internal hard drive completely crashes and your mind is suddenly just this barren wasteland.
It's really one of the most universally frustrating experiences of the human condition.
Truly.
Because you know the data is stored in your head, right? You reviewed it that morning.
Yeah.
But the retrieval system just goes completely offline the second you perceive an audience.
It's the equivalent of studying like the structural engineering of an automobile for 6 months. But the moment someone tosses you the keys and says, drive,
You genuinely can't remember what a steering wheel is.
exactly.
Yeah.
So if you listening right now have ever experienced that specific paralyzing panic, today's deep dive is absolutely built for you.
It really is.
Our source material today is a transcript from a YouTube video by the Masu and Fizu show.
Yeah, good one.
The video is titled, Don't Give Up. Easy English Conversation to Stay Motivated.
And, on the surface, that title sounds like a very straightforward ESL lesson.
Right?
We have a teacher, Masu, guiding a student, Fizu, through the early hurdles of language acquisition.
Standard stuff.
But when we strip away that surface layer of English vocabulary, what we are actually looking at is a surprisingly robust psychological framework for adult learning.
I'm so glad you pointed that out.
It's a masterclass in how a brain acquires any intimidating new skill.
Yeah, because the barriers to learning a language are biologically and psychologically identical to the barriers a senior developer faces when learning a complex new coding language.
Exactly. Or a mid-level manager trying to master public speaking.
Right. The core obstacle isn't the material itself. The core obstacle is overcoming the fear of imperfection to build usable confidence.
Spot on.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to trace this back to the origin of the frustration. Like, why do we feel that overwhelming urge to just throw our hands up and quit when we hit that wall?
Right.
The video points to this completely false, internalized expectation of perfection.
We see this play out in the very first interaction with the student, Fizu. He confesses to his teacher that he is studying every single day.
Putting in the raw hours.
Exactly. Yet when he tries to string a sentence together out loud, he makes errors and his mind just goes completely blank.
Yeah.
His internal metric for success is 0 errors. So if an error occurs, the system registers a catastrophic failure.
And the teacher, Masu, points out a reality that we all technically know but entirely forget when we're the ones in the hot seat.
Oh, absolutely.
He reminds Fizu that nobody, like not even native speakers, speaks perfect English all the time.
We stumble over words, we use the wrong tense.
We lose our train of thought. We all do it in our native tongues. So treating absolute perfection as the baseline for a new skill is just setting a trap for yourself.
Masu actually executes a very elegant cognitive reframe here.
Yeah.
He tells his student that a mistake isn't a failure condition. A mistake is literal, undeniable proof of growth.
I love that.
Every single time you make an error, you are providing your neurological system with the precise data it needs to adjust its predictive models.
And the video captures a great real-time example of this. Fizu is speaking and says, I am study every day.
Right.
And Masu just gently interjects and models the correct phrasing. He says, I study every day.
Yeah.
And Fizu repeats it correctly. And Masu stops the lesson to say, look at what just happened. You learned something new in 2 seconds.
It's brilliant.
That correction wasn't a punishment for being bad at English. It was the mechanism of learning happening live.
The source introduces a classic analogy to illustrate this, which is swimming. You can read volumes of literature on the biomechanics of swimming. You can watch thousands of hours of Olympic footage to understand the exact angle a hand should enter the water.
But the second you jump into the deep end, all that theory won't keep you afloat.
Exactly. You have to actually move your arms and legs. You have to experience the physical resistance of the water.
Right.
Without the friction of the water against your body, the theory remains purely abstract.
Okay, I want to push back on this, though.
Sure.
Because, frankly, getting into the water is terrifying. When you know for a fact you're going to swallow a lungful of water.
Oh, it's awful.
Making mistakes out loud in front of other human beings, it actively hurts. It's humiliating.
Yeah.
And from an evolutionary standpoint, social humiliation triggers a threat response. So why would the brain voluntarily seek out the friction of making a fool of itself?
It's a great question.
Like, how is a learner supposed to bypass that initial paralyzing brain freeze when they hit the water for the first time?
Well, what's fascinating here is you actually just hit on the exact reason why the brain freeze happens.
Really?
Yeah. When you are engaged in passive learning, so reading a book, watching a video, your brain is in a state of low friction. It feels safe.
Okay.
The moment you step into the arena to perform, your amygdala perceives a social threat and spikes your cortisol.
Ah, the stress hormone.
Right. That cortisol literally blocks access to the prefrontal cortex, which is where your newly learned fragile skill is stored.
Wow.
That is the brain freeze. It's a biological lockout.
So the panic is literally a chemical reaction, not a character flaw.
Entirely chemical. But here is the critical part about the friction of swallowing the water.
Okay.
The brain operates on something called predictive coding. It predicts an outcome, executes an action, and checks the result.
Makes sense.
If you only ever do passive learning, the brain never gets the error signal. When you speak, make a mistake, and feel that slight sting of getting it wrong, that sting is a dopamine reward prediction error.
A chemical flag.
Exactly. It tells your nervous system, the prediction was wrong. We need to physically rewire this neural pathway so we don't make that mistake again.
So you need the sting.
You cannot bypass the brain freeze. You have to wade into it, knowing that the friction is the biological trigger for myelination.
The thickening of the neural pathways.
Yes. The actual thickening that makes a skill permanent.
So the friction isn't the obstacle to learning. The friction is the literal vehicle for the learning.
Precisely.
If you aren't swallowing a little water, your brain has no reason to adapt. That makes sense on a biological level, but man, it sounds exhausting on a psychological level.
It really is.
If we accept that making mistakes and thrashing around a bit is required, how do we prevent our motivation from drowning?
Right?
Because constant failure, even if it's good for the brain, it drains the tank pretty fast.
That requires fundamentally shifting how we measure our own progress. The source uses another analogy for this, which is climbing a massive mountain.
Yeah, I like this one.
If you are halfway up a steep climb and you only ever tilt your head back to stare at the peak, you are going to feel defeated.
Because the distance between where you are and absolute mastery is just vast.
Exactly. It's endlessly discouraging because the peak never seems to get closer. You have to intentionally stop and look down at the valley to see the elevation you've already gained.
And in practice, that means reprogramming your internal dialogue.
Yes.
The video gives a stellar before and after snapshot of this cognitive shift. Like, when the student is overwhelmed, his default thought is, English is too difficult for me.
That is the equivalent of staring at the peak and surrendering to the distance.
Right. But the reprogrammed thought they work toward is, English is challenging, but I'm getting better every day.
That's looking down the mountain.
It doesn't sugarcoat the difficulty. It acknowledges the steepness of the climb, but grounds the learner in the reality of their own momentum.
Yeah.
Fizu has this great moment of realization where he notes that a month ago he couldn't even understand his teacher speaking at a normal pace.
And now he can.
Exactly. That is concrete, undeniable proof of the climb.
And to maintain that momentum, the source outlines 3 very pragmatic daily habits.
Okay, where are they?
First, force yourself to celebrate micro wins. If you understood a single complex sentence today, that warrants recognition.
Okay, love that.
Second, focus on communication over perfect grammar. And third, practice every day, prioritizing consistency over intensity.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I need to stop on that second tip, because focusing on communication over perfect grammar sounds like a trap.
How so?
Well, if I'm learning a programming language and I ignore the syntax, my code just straight up won't compile.
Right.
If I'm learning the piano and I ignore the sheet music to just feel a rhythm, I'm just banging on keys. Doesn't actively ignoring the rules of grammar just bake in permanently bad habits?
It's a common fear.
Aren't we just practicing doing it wrong until the wrong way becomes permanent?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a highly counterintuitive concept, but we have to look at how the brain manages cognitive load. When you are a beginner, your working memory has a very limited capacity. If you are trying to retrieve vocabulary, formulate an idea, and simultaneously apply complex rules of syntax, you overload the system.
It's system crashes.
Exactly. The ultimate goal of language, or really any communicative skill, is to transfer an idea from my brain to your brain.
Right.
If you wait until the syntax is flawless before you attempt the transfer, you build a habit of silence. You paralyze the entire process.
I see. It's like trying to build a house.
Yeah.
If you obsess over painting the trim perfectly before you've even framed the walls or poured the foundation, the house falls down.
That's a much better way to visualize it.
Yeah.
The communication, the raw transfer of the idea is the foundation and the framing. The grammar is the paint and the trim.
Okay, that makes sense.
It is significantly easier for a teacher or a mentor to help you correct the paint job on a house that is already standing than it is to cure a deeply ingrained, paralyzing fear of building anything at all.
Wow, yeah.
You have to establish the habit of speaking first and refine the mechanics second.
Okay, that brings us to the ultimate final boss of learning any new skill: other people.
Oh, yes.
We can fix our internal dialogue, we can accept the friction of making mistakes, and we can look down the mountain to measure our progress. But eventually, we have to perform in front of an audience.
And the sheer terror of social judgment is what stops most people in their tracks.
Exactly. We walk around assuming everyone is a highly critical auditor, just waiting with a red pen for us to slip up.
We really do.
But the source introduces a major reality check that dismantles this anxiety. Most people in the real world will not even notice your mistakes.
Nope.
And if they do notice them, they genuinely do not care. Their primary objective is simply to understand what you want.
And the video makes this fascinating point that making mistakes actually makes you more human and relatable.
Right.
It proves that you are putting in effort, and human beings generally respect vulnerability and effort. They introduce a concept that we can call the native language test.
Okay, what is that?
Think about your own life for a second. If someone who is clearly a non-native speaker approaches you on the street and asks for directions in your native language, but they use the wrong verb tense, do you immediately judge their intelligence?
Do you think, wow, what a catastrophic failure of grammar?
Exactly. You don't even register the error as a character flaw. Your brain automatically bridges the gap to figure out what they need.
You are entirely focused on the semantics, the meaning, not the syntax.
Exactly. We never judge non-native speakers who are making a genuine effort in our language.
Yeah, so why do we harbor this illogical assumption that they will ruthlessly judge us when the roles are reversed?
It makes no sense when you really think about it. And to prove how this works in practice, the video walks through 2 real-world role plays.
The first scenario is navigating the first day at a university, right?
Right. Fizu practices introducing himself and says, "I am very nervous." And Masu refines that to a slightly softer, more native phrasing. "I'm feeling a little nervous."
And later in that same role play, when Fizu tries to express that he feels less anxious after chatting, he says he feels more better.
Yeah.
Masu just gently corrects him to much better. And then they seamlessly move on to practical questions, like asking where the cafeteria is.
The second scenario is signing up for a gym membership.
Oh, that's a good one.
Fizu wants to ask about the difference between the tiers of membership. He asks, "What is the difference?" And Masu tweets it to the contraction, "What's the difference?" to make it flow better in casual conversation.
My favorite part of that gym role play is when Fizu's trying to ask for a trial period. He says, "Can I trying first?"
Yeah.
And they work together to construct the sentence, "Can I try a class before I join?"
Yeah.
But looking at these role plays, the specific vocabulary isn't actually the most important takeaway.
Not at all.
The most important takeaway is the underlying rule Masu establishes for making mistakes in the wild.
Which is smile, correct yourself if you quickly can, and keep talking.
Yeah.
Above all else, never stop.
Never stop mid-sentence.
When you freeze mid-sentence and apologize profusely, you send a signal of panic to your own amygdala.
Which reinforces the fear response for next time.
Exactly. It amplifies the mistake in your own mind and makes the other person uncomfortable. Pushing through, completing the thought, however clumsily, signals to your brain that you survived the threat.
That is how actual confidence is forged.
Yes.
It makes me think of the spotlight effect. In psychology, the spotlight effect is our tendency to believe that there is a massive, blinding, theatrical spotlight shining directly on us at all times.
Highlighting every tiny error we make.
Right, for an audience that is gasping at our incompetence. But the reality is, communicating with another human being is just a game of catch.
I love that analogy.
The other person isn't a judge grading your throwing form. They are just trying to catch the ball so they can throw it back and keep the game going.
Yeah.
If you bobble the ball, you don't freeze in terror, drop to your knees, and walk off the field in shame. You just pick the ball up and throw it.
That analogy perfectly captures the social dynamic. The other person is a collaborative participant, not a hostile critic.
Exactly.
Once you internalize that, it gives you the psychological permission you need to practice. But that immediately presents the next major logistical hurdle for an adult learner.
Which is finding the time.
Right. How do you find the time and energy to practice a new skill every single day without it feeling like a massive, draining chore?
And the source's answer to this is to turn it into muscle memory.
Muscle memory for your mouth. Literally training the physical muscles of your jaw, tongue, and vocal cords to form new sounds and patterns until they become automatic.
Because we often forget that speaking a language or playing an instrument or delivering a speech, it is a physical motor cortex activity.
Yes. Your physical muscles need repetitive mapping just as much as your cognitive memory does.
So true.
The source recommends repeating phrases out loud, slowly and clearly. But the real genius is how they suggest integrating this practice into the mundane parts of your daily life.
This part is brilliant.
They advise narrating your morning routine out loud to yourself.
You are literally standing alone in your kitchen saying out loud, I'm making eggs, I'm pouring juice, I'm putting the toast in.
It sounds incredibly simplistic, perhaps even absurd, but it achieves something vital.
What was that?
It forces your brain to start generating thoughts in the target language organically, entirely removing the pressure and cognitive load of an external conversation.
The other tactic they lean into is merging your learning with your existing hobbies so it stops feeling like homework.
Because homework requires willpower.
And adult willpower is a finite resource. If you have to summon the discipline to sit at a desk with a textbook after an 8-hour workday, you will eventually quit.
Oh, absolutely.
But if you already love watching football, start watching the matches with English commentary. If you're a foodie, put on cooking shows in English.
You're absorbing the syntax, the cadence, and the vocabulary while engaged in an activity you'd be doing anyway.
You are attaching the friction of learning to the dopamine of a hobby.
Exactly. And through all of this daily integration, the source highlights 5 core vocabulary words. But if we look closely, these aren't just random words.
Yeah.
They are an archetypal roadmap of the emotional journey of skill acquisition.
The 5 words are nervous, confident, give up, practice, and improve.
Think about it. Every single learner starts out nervous.
Yeah.
The ultimate destination is to become confident. The greatest threat along the journey is the urge to give up.
Wow.
The only known antidote to giving up is to practice. And the inevitable biological result of practice is that you improve.
And the connective tissue between all of those states is consistency. Just 10 minutes a day of this integrated low-stakes practice like narrating your morning coffee routine is infinitely more effective than waiting for a perfect, uninterrupted 2-hour block on a Sunday that you're inevitably going to procrastinate on.
Definitely.
So what does this all mean? Let me ask you this from a psychological perspective. If I am standing in my kitchen talking to myself about pouring juice, am I actually hacking the system? Because there is zero audience to judge me, am I bypassing the performance anxiety entirely?
Well, this raises an important question. You are bypassing the immediate social threat, which is a fantastic way to lower the barrier to entry and get the motor cortex working.
Okay.
But the deeper hack here is the seamless integration into your existing life. The phenomenon of ego depletion tells us that willpower burns out quickly.
Right.
If learning your new skill requires a massive disruption to your environment, like sequestering yourself in a quiet room with flashcards, you are relying entirely on sheer discipline.
Which fails.
Which always fails eventually. By narrating your morning or watching a cooking show, you are piggybacking the new skill onto habits that are already fully automated in your basal ganglia.
Oh, wow.
You remove the friction of starting, which leaves you with enough mental energy to handle the friction of learning. That is the only sustainable way to survive the long transition from nervous to confident.
You remove the friction of starting so you can handle the friction of learning. I love that. Let's synthesize the mechanics of this for you listening.
Good idea.
If you are in the trenches trying to master a new skill, whether it's a language, a coding framework, or a management style, and you're feeling that paralyzing overwhelm, you need to shift your operating system.
Yeah.
First, you must accept that mistakes are not error codes shutting down your progress. They're the exact friction required to rewrite your neural pathways. You have to be willing to swallow some water.
Second, manage your cognitive load. Stop staring at the peak of the mountain. Look down at the valley, recognize the elevation you've gained, and intentionally celebrate the micro wins.
Shift your internal narrative from, this is impossible, to, This is challenging, but I am gaining ground.
And prioritize the raw transfer of communication over the perfection of the rules. Build the house before you obsess over the paint.
Third, remember that social interaction is just a game of catch.
Mm.
Trust that the audience isn't a hostile judge. They are just trying to catch the ball. When you fumble your words, do not stop the game. Smile, correct yourself if the correction is quick, and keep moving forward to signal to your brain that you are safe.
And lastly, protect your willpower by weaving the practice into the existing fabric of your life. Narrate your actions to map your motor cortex, attach the learning to your hobbies, and rely on 10 minutes of daily momentum rather than exhausting formal study sessions.
It all cycles back to that terrifying sensation we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive.
That moment you freeze up when the mind goes totally blank?
Exactly. That freeze happens because you are biologically terrified of exposing your imperfection to the tribe. But the source left us with a genuinely profound insight. Hiding inside a simple ESL lesson, making mistakes, is exactly what makes you human and relatable.
It signals effort, and effort builds trust.
Right. So, as you go about the rest of your day, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on. In our professional and personal lives, we expend massive amounts of energy trying to hide our struggles. We want to present a flawless, fully formed performance to the world.
We all do it.
But if making mistakes in front of others truly makes us more human and relatable, could intentionally showing your vulnerability while you're in the messy process of learning actually make you more charismatic and better at building deep human connections than if you had executed everything perfectly from the very start?
It really flips the entire concept of performance on its head.
Something to think about the next time you find yourself staring up from the bottom of a very steep mountain.